Hey, all. Welcome to the Sports Experience Podcast with your hosts, Chris Quinn.
And Dom DiTolla.
And this episode, we're doing our final part 3 of Drugs in Baseball.
Yes, indeedy.
We're talking steroids.
Yep.
Steroids. Well, this is the thing, this was my introduction to drugs in baseball. I didn't know that there was a huge cocaine problem. I didn't know there was a huge amphetamine problem. When this Balco thing really hit, I really thought was just like, whoa, this is the first time these guys are cheating.
I really think it was a lot of people's first times.
Yes.
As far as drugs, because by that point, the media has to report everything.
Yes.
And they did some digging.
That's the huge change. I feel like the changeover from the 80s to the 90s was the media became more national. Mm-hmm. It stopped being these beat reporters,
local beat people,
and they stopped the boys club of hiding everything.
Yeah, and everybody starts to notice in the National League before Mark McGwire, from I think the 60s to the mid 90s, only one player hit 50 home runs in a season, and that was George Foster for the Reds.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the 92 season hits, and then there was like 4 or 5 guys that hit 50 or something.
Yeah, like one, but then you had somebody not on the roids like Griffey doing it, but then you had all of these players that you had never heard of.
Well, this is the thing that really bums me out. Griffey had one of the best seasons. I think he hit 56 home runs.
Yeah, 56, and he hit 58, I think, in 97.
In 97, yeah. And it's one of these things where he was obviously not on the roids. He had one of the prettiest swings you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And that's how he would get the ball out. And these guys really clouded this amazing couple of seasons that he had because they were really out hitting him.
Because those were like two of the healthiest, because Griffey, as much of a natural talent and Hall of Famer as he was always seemed to be injured or nicked up. Those were like his 2 healthy seasons where you could see what that natural ability could pull off, and it was so much fun to watch.
Yeah, when I think Griffey, I always think of him catching the ball into the wall.
And then breaking his wrist.
Just essentially breaking his hand off.
Yeah.
But this is the thing that I find disheartening about the roids is it's hard to differentiate from baseball in this era because batting became like it has never been.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely an offensive game, which was weird because both pitchers and hitters were doing it. And when you want to talk about the history of steroids, it doesn't even start with Canseco in the 80s.
Which is what I thought.
Which is what I assumed too before I had kind of done some digging. Tom House, famous pitcher, more famous though now as a quarterback guru who trains professional quarterbacks for the National Football League draft.
Yeah.
He was talking about using steroids that would kill horses back in the 70s as a pitcher.
And it being prevalent throughout pitching, not necessarily throughout the hitting or other positions where pitchers would try and take this to get another 2 miles on their fastball or whatever it is.
And according to him, obviously this could be true, this could not be true, but he was saying like there were 4 to 6 guys on every staff who were using steroids, and if you got beat, the joke between House and other pitchers is like, oh, that guy just out milligrammed you.
Yes.
Which is insane to think, but like we talked about in both of the podcasts leading up to this, it's all about creating that competitive edge. What's legal? What's illegal? Because at this time, steroids is legal. It might be frowned upon, or it might not even be known that people were taking it. But people were taking it because there was basically no downside, like cocaine, thinking at that time.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. Do you think that and I'm pretty sure it has, but the steroids themselves have improved? So,
there are guys still using and getting away with it because you can't test for certain new ones.
Like they start cycling and all those neat words that Joe Rogan taught me. But it's like it's one of those things where you think of these guys in the 70s probably didn't use them to the rate that the guys in the late 80s, 90s, and then the early 2000s were using them.
I mean, the Steelers are my favorite football team, and I've read a lot of books about their teams in the 70s, and basically everybody that wasn't Joe Green on the defensive line and everybody on the offensive line were using them and abusing them. I mean abusing them hard. I mean, there are so few players left alive from that team because of health reasons. I'm not saying steroids is the main cause of it, but they were roiding up like crazy along with the rest of the NFL.
And along with the rest of the drugs that were passing through these professional sports teams in this era. That's the thing that we're really harping on here is the inability of Major League Baseball to even act. And then finally in 2005, it's like they're like, this whole thing is just toppling over.
It blew up in their face. Another federal grand jury.
Exactly.
A lot of testimony, a lot of secrets being revealed. I mean, Major League Baseball is the boys' club, and with a strong players' union that doesn't want testing, you're going to get away with it. I mean, and that's the other thing I'll refer to before going back in time a little bit is when you think about the heyday of steroids in baseball, when we're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s, baseball is coming off the strike in 94 and is at a shit level of popularity.
Yes.
What do you think these owners and these executives in baseball are going to do because of that old awesome Nike commercial with Glavine and Maddox, chicks dig the long ball, fans dig the long ball? I don't care if this guy gained 40 pounds over the offseason and looks like a Greek god when he was a waifish motherfucking second baseman last year. He's hitting 40 home runs and people are coming to the ballpark again.
Exactly. It's this change that happened so quick and it happened throughout almost every single ballpark where you're just like, well, we have somebody that hits 30 to 40 home runs. Like, it was so uncommon to have a ball team without that guy.
Yeah, and without multiple guys that could do that.
I was going to say, you look at the A's, and that was the thing
that's kind of what I was going to go back to, but yeah.
Well, it's these things that players on these teams that wouldn't ever be associated with steroids now are being looked back at like, whoa, did you take them too? Because they were just like, they were so much like.
And that was during the time where I had talked about the code, is this doesn't leave here.
Yes.
It's like the greenies, only, guys don't want it to get out, but you know who on your team is taking something.
And you could see on the other team who's taking it because, I mean, it's obvious because you're playing these guys all the time and you see them all the time and you're just like, whoa, that guy put on 40 pounds of pure muscle.
And you don't know why.
And over the offseason. Yeah. It's not one of those things where you're like, he had a growth spurt, or you know what I mean? Like, he's 27 and it's so interesting. And I found it interesting that Canseco, and I brought this up before, was so vilified when he shed this light
in
on
2005 with his book Juiced, which is a great read, by the way, even if you're not a baseball fan.
Yeah. It's not even a baseball book. It's more like a drug book,
Yeah.
Like,
so Canseco came up with the A's in 86 as a rookie. He had started taking steroids and became the 40-40 man, Roy Lee Reynolds. But he was kind of the first player to use them. And in his book, he talks about using them because what Canseco did, unlike a lot of these other players, is he was very smart about it in terms of consulting physicians, knowing how to cycle, when to cycle, what drugs to use, and use them appropriately.
That's what I think he revolutionized the use of steroids because
they call him the Typhoid Mary of steroids because he was the one that kind of brought it all in. Yeah, he understood the science and medicine behind it.
Exactly.
But what he couldn't do was kind of inform his other teammates like Mark McGwire. Mark McGwire, according to the book, and you can kind of see that this is true because of how injured he was throughout his career, and now he uses the excuse, I only use steroids to rehab my injuries, and it's like, no, you were getting injured because you were abusing them.
Yes. So working out so much and not letting his body recuperate. There's there's these things that you need to do when you cycle steroids.
Canseco used a great example of using steroids appropriately. There was a player for the A's in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was a first baseman. His dad he played for the Rangers and was a GM for the Rangers. Tom Grieve, his son Ben Grieve.
Okay.
Ben Grieve was a decent-sized dude and a decent ball player. Not a bad one, not a good one, just a decent player. Mm-hmm. I think he was maybe second in the Rookie of the Year voting in 98, I want to say. But the thing about Grieve is because he had a bigger frame, he was probably 6'3", 6'4", 200-something pounds. He's like, if I could get my hands on Ben Grieve, I could have turned him from an average ball player but using steroids correctly into a star, because that's how much performance enhancement you can get when you take these drugs correctly.
And especially when you have the frame to hold these gigantic muscles.
Exactly. And Canseco plays for the A's. Power lineups in the late 80s, early 90s. The Bash Brothers.
I always thought of, because they would hit their forearms against each other.
Yeah.
And I always thought of like if they accidentally did it against like their leadoff guy.
Oh,
and
no, break his arm.
Just shatter his arm, because they really go into it. Like it's one of these things where you could tell they are just so roided up and so juiced. It's the perfect name
juiced.
for his.
I mean, they're juiced up because they're already big guys.
They're already big guys. That's why the steroids really starts to show people what it could do for hitting, because it takes a guy who can hit the ball, I mean, like 250, 300, and then he starts hitting it 325, or you know what I mean? Like, it really takes a pop fly that would be an out and makes it a home run.
Exactly. And Canseco would always deny it up until his tell-all book.
Exactly.
That he was taking it. But by 92, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is where a lot of people forget kind of these teams in the early 90s, is he gets traded to Texas for Ruben Sierra and a bunch of pitchers.
Okay.
Like he did in Oakland, Canseco brings the steroids to Texas, which has a really good young team at the time. They have Juan Gonzalez, who's been involved. He was hitting 30, 40 home runs before the steroids.
Yep.
Ivan Pudge Rodriguez, who's in the Hall of Fame, and Canseco points out in his book, was a user. And then you have all the pitchers, and Rafael Palmeiro, who was maybe a 300 hitter, but who was only hitting 10 to 12 homers a season. Already great player.
One of the first players to actually get busted for it when they started making it illegal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it ruined his 3,000 hit, 500 homer career.
Exactly.
Which a lot of can be attributed to steroids, but he was a good player to begin with.
No, yeah. That's the thing is, what I think steroids does, it takes good players and makes them great players.
And what it also does, and you see in the examples of Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, who I both believe should be in the Hall of Fame based on this reason, they already had Hall of Fame careers by their mid-30s when they weren't taking steroids.
Yes.
All the stats they had put up to that point, which were clean, would make them first ballot in Cooperstown. What the steroids did for them, and because of the injury time recovery and because they were using them correctly, is it made them dominant players through their mid-30s, late 30s, and even into their 40s.
Almost better players, especially in that mid-30s, than they were in the 20s.
It made them absolute mutants.
Yes.
Like Barry Bonds won 3 MVPs in 4 years not juicing, and then won like another 3 in the early 2000s with the Giants.
Yes. It's one of these things where it makes great players even better.
Did you ever hear about his alleged meeting with Ken Griffey Jr. after the 98 season?
Bonds?
Yeah.
No.
So like, Barry Bonds is a surly guy, much like Clemens, which I think is precisely why they're both not in the Hall of Fame. Like, you throw the steroids out of it. I think most sports writers do. They're just surly assholes.
Yes.
Bonds in 98 had a healthy season. He's 2 years coming off of a 40-40 legit season of 40 homers, 40 steals.
Yep.
And Bonds meets with Ken Griffey Jr. in Phoenix. This is an alleged story. But Bonds had over 40 home runs in 1998. But everybody remembers 1998 because of McGuire and Sosa.
Yep.
Sammy Sosa, a rail-thin player for the Texas Rangers and Chicago White Sox washout who became a star in his mid-30s due to steroids.
And he put on so much muscle.
Yeah. But what Bonds the meeting was is Bonds said, I'll show these motherfuckers. You want to start juicing with me? And Griffey's like, no, it's just not
worth it.
He's like, it's not what I'm about.
Yeah.
You do you. But that's the jealousy of Bonds is what led to him his knowingly or unknowingly taking steroids.
Exactly. His legitimate 40-40 season was overshadowed by these two guys who were obviously juicing at that point.
And juicing hard too.
Yes.
Like, they weren't, I mean, McGuire at that point was a really good player. You could make the argument for, but he had been juicing for how long? A decade?
I was going to say
this.
Yeah, since him and Canseco in the A's. But I found something interesting about Bonds before we get off of him. His drug test in 2005 actually came back for amphetamines, not steroids, and then they further tested him.
Yeah,
and that's when they were like, "Whoa, you're completely jacked up." And then,
but it just shows you how pervasive amphetamines are too.
Exactly. That's where I wanted to bring it back to was greenies are so Coke is kind of made its way out. People saw
it kind of cycled out in the negative effects.
Exactly. People saw the negative effects. They saw all these ex-ball players really struggling, and greenies almost never disappeared.
No.
And it's one of these things that I bet with roids, the uppers with this ability to work out essentially twice as much, twice as fast, whatever it is, it had to have just benefited all of these players that used them.
And you're already like in a high and angry state. You're basically like Connor Hanna.
Oh, yes. I'll tell you, Connor Hanna's a local comedian here in Tucson. And he
does the Canceled podcast with Clint Lapsansky and Tony Brune, by the way. You should listen.
Yes, please check that out before it gets canceled.
Yeah.
It's one of these things where I was asking him because he talks about this on stage, so I don't think I'm doing
No, you're not
crazy.
outing him or anything.
But he talked about doing steroids, and I asked him what it was like, and he said it's not like any other drug.
Yeah.
So like how cocaine is kind of like amphetamine. So they're both uppers, or how like some like hallucinogens are kind of the same, how they like come in waves and that kind of stuff. He's like, it's not like any other drug you could even imagine. Like you feel like you're like godlike because you can just do so much more than what you once did.
Do whatever you want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is dangerous as shit.
I was going to say, and then that's what he said was the irrational thinking starts to come in,
Yeah.
and that's when he started to stop doing it. But the thing is, because when I first met Connor, he was fucking huge.
Yeah, dude, he was really jacked.
And it was one of those things where he was just like, look at somebody's shoulders, because
Yeah.
nobody can grow their shoulders without steroids. And once their shoulders start to grow, you're like, oh shit, this guy's juicing.
And you have the back knee and the weird hair growth. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The back knee, we brought that up for the
Galata.
Galata. I knew I was saying it wrong, but it was one of those things where people started noticing it in that era of the 90s and then into the 2000s of like, whoa, this guy is...
Canseco said those were two markers, and the other big one was, because, you pat guys on the ass, if they make a good play.
About patting guys on the ass.
Yeah, me too. I'm a seasoned veteran of ass patting.
Thank you. All right.
What? But no. In all seriousness, when a guy wouldn't want you to do that...
Because he had acne on his ass?
No, because that's where you inject the shots.
Oh, yeah.
So another player I wanted to bring up, and Canseco brought this up also, but Lenny Dykstra was a heavy steroid user in the 80s, in the late 80s, early 90s, especially when he was really good on the Phillies. He was good playing clean for the Mets, doing amphetamine, smoking cigarettes, cocaine, being a complete crazy person. But Dykstra was talking about how after the Mets traded him to the Phillies because he got into some tussles and issues with his manager, Davey Johnson, who wouldn't want to play him every day, because at that time, Dykstra was probably like 5'10", 160, 170 pounds. His body wouldn't hold up over a 162-game season, even with amphetamines, because Lenny Dykstra played the game of baseball harder than anybody I've ever seen play it, honestly. But he went, because he met his wife. His first wife was from Mississippi. He had met her while playing minor league ball down there. He had got a hold of a doctor and said, I want you to prescribe me something that'll make me play 162 games a year and keep my body in physical condition. And it worked, but the problem for Dykstra, like McGuire and a lot of these other guys who aren't as knowledgeable or want to play by the rules as far as medicine like Canseco, he abused them and he ran into a lot of trouble until he started being like, okay, I need to be able to use these correctly.
Yeah.
Because Dykstra's whole mindset, and I'll get into this right after with Canseco when he talks about the Latin players, is Dykstra was like, I want to play baseball and make enough money so I'll never have to do anything the rest of my life. He was taking steroids so he could get bigger contracts and show teams that he could play.
Yeah, play full seasons and be that huge contract guy.
And when Canseco in one of the chapters of his book, because obviously he's from Cuba, grew up in Miami, but he's from Cuba.
Yeah.
A lot of these younger Latin players in the 80s and 90s and 2000s started taking steroids as well. And there's an economic argument behind it, like with Dykstra, is you're telling these 17-year-old kids from the Dominican who are playing with like gloves made out of fucking milk cartons, you can make more money than you've ever dreamed in your life if you take these pills or you take these shots.
Yeah, if you just shoot this
and
into
nobody's drug testing you.
Yes.
A really good example of this that he brought up was 2002 MVP shortstop Miguel Tejada.
Yeah.
Miguel Tejada popped for steroids, performance enhancers. He was popped for another drug later in his career, which we'll get into at the end. But, you're getting these guys from Latin America and the Caribbean who have no other option. Why wouldn't you do steroids?
Yes.
That's the question, is because of how much money is involved in baseball, you're going to go and get yours as simply an economic argument.
Yeah,
If I can play 15 years as opposed to 7, why wouldn't you do it? The incentive is just there.
And it was more prevalent through the South American players, and I feel like they kind of were showing each other like, hey, if you really want to get that extra step, take it. You know what I mean? Like it's really interesting the way you put it with coming from these absolutely destitute, places, and really coming to America with no money. We actually kind of brought it up with the soccer episode with Messi, where they would get a plane ticket in and they would be like, well, if I didn't make it, I'm pretty much going to go homeless.
Exactly.
So why wouldn't they cut that corner and try to make that team and try and be the best player,
and
essentially?
Nobody's enforcing it.
And that was the thing. Nobody's enforcing it, and they're almost encouraging it.
Yeah, we want fans in the stands.
We want
people to watch us on TV.
We want the long ball.
Chicks dig the... That is my second favorite Nike commercial behind the Dukes of Hazzard, Randy Moss, Jason Williams one. But also it features Heather Locklear, which is just, oh yeah, she registers high on the strokeability scale, Wayne's World.
Oh yeah.
But no, as far as the economics though of it, it's you do it. Another example I wanted to bring up as a Padres fan was third baseman Ken Caminiti.
Okay.
He got traded to San Diego in, I believe, 1995. Decent third baseman for the Astros. Decent player. He goes to San Diego, and geographically, if you don't know, right next to San Diego is Tijuana. Caminiti decides to start juicing in 95. Caminiti, short drive over the border, get what you need, steroids. He's the 1996 National League MVP, clubbing over 40 homers.
Yeah.
But like the other guys, unlike Canseco, he overdid it. He got hurt here and there, kind of washed out. I mean, he was part of their pennant-winning team in 98, but he was hurt a lot. Hey, everybody. Just want to take a quick break to let you know that our Sports Experience podcast is brought to you by Engle Studio here, and they're here in Tucson for all your recording needs.
Yeah, it's one of these things where you see when the injuries start to go, where you're like, whoa, like nobody's getting injured that much. You can kind of tell that they're on the roids because the way that these guys were not cycling it in and out, the way that, and it's so interesting, the way that Canseco really took the bull by the horns and he was like, no, this is how you do it. And everybody looked at his body and his recovery and we're just like, oh, I'm going to follow exactly what he does.
And to me, I mean, obviously Canseco wanted to write the book because he was just sick of all the nonsense.
Yes.
I think part of the reason, because he dedicates a chunk of that book to it, is these idiots weren't doing it right.
I know.
He was talking, that book is almost not only a tell-all, but it's an advertisement for performance-enhancing drugs when you take them right.
Yes, exactly.
And he went into what they do, how you're supposed to do them. I mean, it was really a fascinating read. I mean, obviously someone helped him ghostwrite it, but like it's really good.
He had all the knowledge with that, it's really interesting because, and you see McGuire not necessarily doing it correctly, but the benefits of still doing it is just so ridiculous. And McGuire with those pretty much 2 healthy seasons, and he cracks like 65 home runs or something.
Yeah, 70 and 98.
70, yeah.
And
Sosa had 66 or something.
Sosa, unlike McGuire, Sosa had 3 straight seasons of over 60.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen a Sammy Sosa rookie card or a card early in his career when he played for Texas or he played for the White Sox. That dude was rail thin.
Look at those cards and look at him now.
I mean,
so he has gone so off the rails. Have you seen him lately?
Dude, he looks like he's in whiteface as a mime.
He started bleaching his skin.
Yeah, well,
so I think he had a skin disease of,
do you know,
I forget what it's called, but
there are a lot of Dominicans who do that. This is like a sociological thing. So like the Dominican Republic shares an island with Haiti.
Oh yeah.
And people in the Dominican, some people, I'm not talking about all of them, are very proud because Haiti was founded as a slave sugar plantation colony, and the western half, which is the Dominican Republic half, they were founded by Spaniards. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, historically, the lighter skin you have, the higher strata of society you can rise to. So
And Haiti is almost all
black.
Black. So
And so in the Dominican, lighter skin, for centuries, it was valued more.
Yes.
So there are
that's
people
why you
that
see
do that.
Yeah. And it's so weird because you're right. He is rail thin, black, and now he is pretty much, because he's still pretty muscular and white. It's so weird. It's like the Michael Jackson.
And like you can see the progressions of players when they come up when they're younger, like as skinny as they are. Like a good example I use is Miguel Cabrera.
Oh, yeah.
Who's set to be in the Hall of Fame. When he came up when he was 19 with the Marlins, he was pretty rail thin. He was a kid, essentially. But as, he's into his mid 30s now, it's like a flip book after he went to Detroit where he looked like 2012 or 2014 Miguel Cabrera, 2003 Miguel Cabrera.
Yes.
So he's put on weight, but it's like a natural weight.
I was going to say over like 4 years. That's the thing with Sosa and McGuire and these guys who are juicing so much was like they would go for an off season, come back and you'd be like, who is that?
Yeah, like Adrian Beltre is a good example of a guy who he was skinny when he came up and then his body, developed with him naturally.
Exactly.
He wasn't overweight like Cabrera is.
Yeah.
But like he played till he was like 41.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I can't imagine. So, and I brought this up on the last two podcasts, but I can't imagine that the quality of baseball deteriorated. It had to have just shot through the roof.
And it did, and you can see that. I think what's weird, though, is that was when the offensive explosion happened.
Yep.
And it always weirds me out because I think of when it comes to steroids, there were pitchers involved in it, too.
They had to have been.
Everybody is, but it's almost like, okay, these players are seeing the ball better, they're making better contact, and the pitchers are throwing it harder.
Yeah,
so it's just going to lead to insane stuff.
Yeah, so they're throwing it harder and it's getting hit harder. So it's almost like it was like the perfect storm.
Perfect storm. Yeah,
because pitchers were notoriously busted for this less, but I don't think they were using it necessarily less. Like I think it was so prevalent. You had to have had just guys from every position using it. That's the thing about roids, and that's the thing about coke was I doubt that every position was like, oh shit, let's get a bunch of coke.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like more of I like cocaine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's what makes roids, I think, the outlier of the drug. So
it is.
I feel like greenies and coke were very similar, and then roids came around, and that's when MLB had to say, hey, these mutants can't just be towering home runs, to the parking lots anymore.
Because it was steadily rising every year. It was guys you had never heard of or never associated with having that type of power. So like by 2003, you have the Balco investigation.
Yep.
Which is the Bay Area Lab Corporation. I want to say that was the acronym. It's in San Francisco, Oakland area. That's where Barry Bonds was allegedly getting his cream that he didn't know what was in it. Guys like Gary Sheffield who were allegedly taking it. And not only with that, the Mitchell report comes out, which is a list of a bunch of players. It was never released to the public, by the way. So it was like, we're going to randomly drug test players because the MLB heard some rumblings, kind of like with cocaine. And when the names came up, we don't know. They've released some illegally, like David Ortiz was one of the guys who was doing it when he was rail thin playing in Seattle, minor league organization.
The Giambi brothers.
Yeah, a lot of guys for the Giants and A's, obviously.
Yeah,
you can get it.
Exactly.
Local guys. But the Mitchell report comes out, and they have a federal grand jury, and they start calling people. And all I think of is Roy Lee Reynolds saying, do you want to go hunting with that one ginger douchebag who cried in front of Congress? Or do you want to go hunt Sasquatch and aliens with the 40-40 man?
I know. Jose Canseco.
Yeah, like Mark McGwire cried and basically said, I'm not here to talk about the past.
His testimony was so weird, and this is what I think with drug psychosis and how it is in roids was he was almost like not present. It was so weird. He was almost just like I'm going to cry and then they're going to forgive me and everyone's going to be like, good job, Mark.
It was almost like he was doing the Chappelle show. I plead the fifth.
Exactly. Like he didn't want to mention anything, but why the hell are you crying your eyes out?
Bro, did you see the Sosa one?
No, I can't.
So during Sosa's, he went full, I don't speak English that well.
Oh, I remember that.
And then the best one, the ultimate best, because he got popped for it later, was Palmero going, I did not do steroids, period. Like wagging his finger, and it's like, oh, bitch, you're going to get your comeuppance.
Yep.
Like, come
on
now.
That's the thing is, these guys, they were all doing it, and they were all denying it because nobody was drug testing.
Well,
so
it's almost like with cocaine and with greenies and with the Black Sox, baseball didn't want it to come out. They wanted it swept under the rug, and it just blew up in their faces again.
It had to have been so known. This is my thing in 2004, 2005. It had to have been like every GM knew, every manager knew. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
no.
There wasn't like this hierarchy of being like, oh, we just didn't know what was going on. It was like, no, you guys, like, there was no way that.
If you have eyes, you know. Like, there's a great Robin Williams bit. He's like, you want to know how you can tell someone's doing steroids? If they go up to the plate with a Mardi Gras head and Raisinets, you're out.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things where they literally calculate their physical appearance, their like abilities throughout the entire year. They wouldn't be like, oh shit, you just gained 20 pounds. Like it's one of these things where they had to have known, and they had to have been not standing up to it to a point where they were almost encouraging it.
Well, and dude, the league was in dire straits from an image standpoint post-strike.
Yes.
I mean, what that strike eliminated were two very important things. There were like 3 guys closing in on Maris's 61 record, but Tony Gwynn was hitting 394.
Yeah, he
would have hit 400 that year, and they were the second worst team in baseball, and he was raking. God bless you, Tony Gwynn. Rest in peace. You didn't do steroids because you went from like Dom 2003 to Dom 2016 in throughout your career.
Oh, I love that. He was the only slightly chubby player, and he was probably the best hitter. Was he your favorite player?
Yeah, I had 3 favorites. I had Tony Gwynn, Robbie Alomar, and John Kruk.
Oh, yeah. All right.
All former Padres from when I was a kid.
Sure. But it just makes me think of that, where these guys who did it clean, who played naked with the roids era, almost get overshadowed.
They do, but I mean, when you win, I think 7 batting titles, people take notice.
But that's the thing is, like, he should be the name, and he is, but it's one of these things where he gets overshadowed by McGuire, by Sosa, and it's not even like they're like, oh, not talking shit on them. It's like the era gets overshadowed.
It does. It's clouded and kind of shitty, and when it comes to Hall of Fame voting, unless you have those talents like a Gwynn and an Alomar who like did it, and you could tell that their body types and their career arcs were like appropriate. A normal player.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I can overlook that. But when you look at guys like Jeff Bagwell allegedly did it, a lot of guys in Houston allegedly did it. You look at Ivan Rodriguez, Mike Piazza was one guy who's been kind of tied to it, but not confirmed.
Like with Bagwell, though, his body type almost changed. And it's one of these things, like you were talking about, these guys getting into the league being skinny and then over years gaining that much muscle.
Well, I had brought it up in the Boggs episode with Bagwell, just to tie it back in there. At the time in the early 90s, when Boggs was ending his career in Boston, the Red Sox had a glut of talent at third and first base in their minor league system. They had Scott Cooper, Tim Naring, Mo Vaughn, and Jeff Bagwell. Mo Vaughn, another steroid user.
Yep.
But with Bagwell, when he was in the minors, he was like a batting champion for average. He was like, when the scouts looked at him, they said, this is a good corner infielder. He'll hit you 315 to 325 every season during his prime.
But not a power hitter.
Maybe club you 15 to 20 doubles and 10 to 15 home runs a year.
Yes.
And they traded him to Houston based on that. And there's an interesting story in that Phillies book that I just gave you today about Pete Incaviglia, who played on those Phillies teams, was possibly getting drugs from Jeff Bagwell the season before that he had played in Houston.
Sure.
I mean, it's so cloudy now.
Yes.
And it's almost like these Hall of Fame voters give Clemens and Bonds the bad rap because they weren't nice to them. Not because they don't belong in there.
Because there's so many other players that were obviously on steroids that got in. And this is the thing that I hate about, and we bring this up all the time, about Pete Rose not getting in, was he didn't necessarily cheat the way people are associating these people today, like Bonds and
I'll say one thing during this time. I keep bringing this up. I'm not coming down on any of these guys that took steroids. The only one that I will come down on are liars like Palmeiro.
Oh, yes.
Is if you took them during that era when they were perfectly legal, frowned upon, but legal, I won't say anything.
Yeah.
I have no right and no business to question your decision making.
Yes, especially for the betterment of your family and stuff like that, like we were talking about earlier with these economic situations that these guys are coming from, which are just like so bad. How could you not shoot that angle?
But before we get to kind of what MLB starts to do with suspensions, I wanted to throw in one quick story.
All right.
It's so good. The guy that outed Clemens for doing it when he was in New York, he was a teammate of his, was a relief pitcher, Jason Grimsley. Jason Grimsley, on I think the 99 World Series team. But the best Jason Grimsley story is when he was in Cleveland, there was a guy named Albert Bell who was a clean player, but he corked his bat a lot, apparently.
Okay.
So in one of the games, I think they're playing the White Sox, but they're at, I think they're at Comiskey Park too. And during the game, one of the opposing coach accuses Albert Bell of corking his bat after he hits a home run. The umpires, when you cork a bat, they take it back into the umpire locker room and they look at it after the game. The bat was corked.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. It was common knowledge that Bell tried to get that edge, not by illegal drugs, but by corking his bat to make it lighter. So the bat speed is what generates all the power.
Yes.
So
Ted Williams really revolutionized that. But anyways, I know where you're going with this story. It's one of my favorites.
But so anyway, it's in the umpire's locker room. Jason Grimsley is a relief pitcher on the Indians. Everybody's freaking out because they know Albert's corking his bats.
They know, yeah. There's no hiding that one.
So they send Jason Grimsley into the clubhouse, and he climbs through the ceiling into the vent, fucking John McClane style in Die Hard.
Yep.
Into the umpire's locker room and replaces Bell's bat with not Bell's bat. Because, as Omar Vizquel always joked, all of Albert's bats were corked.
Yeah, they couldn't find one that wasn't corked, so they just went and got someone that looked like it.
They got first baseman Paul Sorrento's bat and replaced it with Albert Bell's bat.
It's so ridiculous.
And he climbs back up into the vent.
I was going to say, he gets away with it.
Yeah.
They didn't get, this was a story that was found out post,
Yeah, post-event. But I just wanted to throw that out there because it's hilarious and outstanding.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to bring up the A-Rod getting busted real quick.
Because he got popped after, because what MLB did in 2005, 2006, steroids are banned now.
Yes,
you can't use them. And the union caved and everybody gets drug tested. First one, it's 50 games. Second one, it's a season. Third time, you're out. Three strikes, you're out. It's baseball.
A-Rod, who gets busted, there's the craziest stories behind this. So if you ever want to check out more in depth about this, there's a documentary called Screwball by the guy who did Cocaine Cowboys.
Oh yeah.
Which are they're just great documentaries about this. But it's so crazy that the MLB was so adamant at this point of busting players that they literally had a bunch of a team of private detectives that went around and followed these players, and they had all this slush fund money to pay off people. And it's one of the most interesting stories, and it's from what the MLB was in 2002 or whatever you want to, the early 2000s. They are the complete opposite in the 2000 teens, because they are if anybody's doing this, we want to crack down on it as hard as we can.
Because they took such an image hit. It's funny.
Yes.
It wasn't gambling. It wasn't greenies. It wasn't cocaine.
No.
It was
the roids.
Oddly enough, roids.
Yeah.
And what's weird about Rodriguez is he's just like Bonds and Clemens.
Yes.
When he was playing naked in Seattle and then Texas.
Yeah.
He was
great.
having a Hall of Fame career. But then you had somebody playing naked and you saw the career arc dip, which was very sad because he did suffer injuries like Nomar Garciaparra.
Yes. It's very interesting, and that's why I can't believe guys are still using it. You still, and I brought this up before.
Robinson Cano got popped.
Robinson Cano just recently got popped, and then I couldn't remember the guy's name, but it was a relief pitcher from the Astros. If you're even thinking even more that the Astros shouldn't have won that 2018 World Series, this guy got popped
Yeah.
I think in that year, and then he recently got popped, like I think it was February for it again, and they essentially kicked him out of baseball, like you were saying. And it's one of these things where I can't believe guys are still using it, but you could see
it's the competitive edge.
It's something that they almost can't not do. You know what I mean? Let me double negative that one. It's like it's a desire that is unquenchable, like they have to constantly try and get better.
And if new drugs are coming out that they can't test for,
and they
always are. Look at track and field and what a rat's nest that is.
Yep.
I mean, guys make their own executive decisions. Now it's much harder, so a lot of guys just do it their own way and play naked. But at that same time, when they started banning steroids, guess what they finally banned at that point?
Yeah, this is the thing, is they almost did like a blanket ban, and they finally were like, hey, guys, greenies need to go out.
And players were freaking out at the time.
Yeah.
Because I remember Jason Grilli, who was a closer for the Pirates and a few other teams, was saying, why do you think this is maybe a year or two after their ban, why do you think we drink so many energy drinks?
Yes.
Now
that was the thing that people say they needed something to replace that.
Well, some guys were using energy drinks,
and then
others started because the new drug du jour in baseball is ADHD meds.
Yeah,
Adderall, things like that.
And you have to be. Here's the thing: it's illegal.
It's legal if you're prescribed.
If you
have a prescription,
and they're saying that the prescription for these ball players are pretty much being given out.
Yeah, they're handed out like candy, and a lot of them are using that to replace greenies, which is just as bad because that's low-grade meth, what you're taking.
Exactly. Well, I want to bring up Aubrey Huff. When we do this research, it always spiders off.
It really does.
And
I go down rabbit holes.
Yeah, I got into this thing about Aubrey Huff, who won 2 World Series with the Giants in 2012, 2014, or
2012, 2010.
2010.
That was a heartbreaking year for Padres fans, by the way.
Not for me. My grandpa was a Giants fan.
Oh, man.
And he used to watch them in Brooklyn, or you know what I mean? And whatever.
New York. Polo Grounds.
Polo Grounds. And it was one of those things, it was right before he died, where he got to watch the Giants win and then win again. So the second one, he was kind of out of it, but the first one, he was so into it.
Yeah.
But it's one of these things where he said he was ridiculously addicted to Adderall to a point where it was getting like really bad. It's
the new greenies.
It's the new greenies.
Because you took them away, and then now Major League Baseball, unless you have the prescription, if you actually have ADHD, and that goes for all professional sports.
Yeah.
Adderall use is heavy in football now because guys don't want to do steroids. They don't want to do the painkillers or anything, and they want to be dialed in.
Yeah.
I mean, baseball, to their credit, they've taken weed off that list, which is just fantastic. But yeah, Adderall is the new thing. And it took them until 2006 to erase the uppers.
I was going to say, and I wonder how long it's going to take them to erase, because obviously it's illegal for unprescribed, but it has to be so easy for these guys in college and in high school for them to like go to their school counselor.
Oh, they're always taking them.
You know what I mean? Like it's almost like, hey, this is going to be better for me in life. And they're just like, okay.
And that's kind of the whole thing where the steroids actually worked and why it didn't work before that for anything really else is they've gone to the minor leagues and tried to put a crackdown on it.
Yes.
Because that's honestly where everything starts for baseball is your minor league system, who these guys are exposed to, what they're exposed to.
Well, they're starting to do steroids senior year of high school and then college and then minor league. So this is like the 5-year period in which they're really doing it. There's a comedian named Chris DiStefano. He's absolutely hilarious, but he talks about, he was a college basketball player, but he talks about doing steroids for the first time in high school.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you're just like, wow, these guys are really like these athletes that are about to take that step to college. They see that and they're like, they're not testing now.
They're not testing now, and I want that competitive edge.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing is, and this is what I've gained from this whole drugs in baseball series that we've done. You should never, when it comes to things that you don't want, ever turn a blind eye and think it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Ever. Whether it's betting, whether it's drugs, whether it's just behavior in general. You start turning a blind eye, it will get too out of control for you to even handle later.
Well, never turn a blind eye and expect it to go, you know?
Yeah,
like
it'll never go away.
No, it's only going to get worse with these things that are, and I hate to keep saying it, but angle shooting, when they're literally like, I need to get a slight bit better than the third baseman that I'm going up against.
Yeah.
It's one of these things where for their own mental, I would say health, they almost get into it, and then it destroys their mental health. It's such a crazy thing, because even with the Adderall, like Aubrey Huff was saying, that it really like took a toll on his family.
He almost tried to kill himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's still so prevalent, and like I said before, it's one of these things where growing up watching baseball, I had no idea.
Yeah. You just want to watch the game.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're not aware of social and economic factors and even watchability factors about why that first baseman is 50 pounds heavier this year.
Exactly.
You know, you're just like, man, he went into the weight room. And that's kind of what the coaches would say. They'd turn a blind eye and be like, man, someone hit the weights this offseason.
Exactly, yeah.
When in all reality, you know, oh, Jose Canseco plays on my team. Oh, maybe he didn't hit the weight room as often.
Well, it's one of those things where I think that the thing with drugs in baseball is it still is such a huge problem.
It is.
I don't know if it will ever...
It'll never go away.
Yes, I don't know if it will ever go away, but I don't know if it'll ever be, because now MLB is really trying to be proactive for the first time.
And that's the thing. They're at least trying. And I'm not saying that, you know, guys aren't coming up with new steroids, with new testing,
new cycles, all of that.
You have to at least try.
Yes. And they weren't for so many years.
And baseball, they had no incentive to care or try.
Yeah.
Until explosion in their face.
Well, it's one of these things where it suffered, and like we were saying, during the 90s, 2000s, that's when it had its boom. But then post that, it really suffered hard. Like,
it did.
A lot of people got out of baseball. I stopped watching baseball post that era because...
It was hard. It was really hard for me to stay with baseball after that, because it wasn't even that the guys were doing it. I was just so disappointed at the shit show and the lack of leadership at the top.
Yep.
And the union basically being able to push around the commissioner and everyone else.
Push around the sport.
You
know, and that's it really came at a cost of the sport.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. This was our first multiple parter episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to that podcast. This is just a stock message at the end of all of our podcasts, so we hope you enjoy. You listen to whatever athlete that was. Give us a follow at the Sports Experience Podcast on Instagram. Also, myself at Quinn Comedy on Instagram. Also, DiTolla Dominic on Instagram. Just follow us all around. If you have any suggestions for any athletes you want us to do, shoot us an email at thesportsexperiencepodcast@gmail.com. And we always are recording right here at Engle Studio. Thank you all very much.